Rather than just say, that's not everything. Throw this out, this gloss over it and move on.
Oh, it's called the hair versus the book that we got. I asked the Grace bookstore to contact me when they came in. She said they ordered them last week, but she said why aren't they ordered until I'll let you know when we get 20%.
We can, in the hallway, have the folks come in. Let's open our notes to the section on brokenness, the sixth aspect of preaching with passion. This will be the last of the factors that have to do with changing or affecting our nature, producing an energetic nature, and this section is dealing with brokenness. I preface it with a comment by the wife of G. Campbell Morgan, one of the early expositors, that kind of wrote some commentaries and began the first of these expositors. And there was a discussion one day when he and his wife went to hear preaching that he said, isn't he a great expositor, a great preacher? And she responded by saying, he's a good preacher, but he'll be better once he has suffered for a while. So she was able to catch in to the fact that he was talking, but not talking from an aspect of man that has gone through a deep suffering that does affect your preaching style, your preaching nature. And so afflictions or going through times of great trials are essential for passionate preaching. So we need to understand that the whole process of learning to preach with passion, it really is like the Lord was himself a man of sorrows and acquainted with griefs. Remember that? It was said of him in Isaiah, he's a man of sorrows and acquainted with griefs. And we have to also learn to be that, men of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Jerry Vines says, when our hearts are broken, we learn how to preach to others who have broken hearts. Preaching is to break hard hearts and to heal broken hearts. Good combination there. That is most effectively done when the preacher himself has been through his own valley. That is the valley of difficulties or the valley of tears. McLaren, again another great expositor, said it takes a crucified man to preach a crucified Savior. So when we're talking about emphasizing Christ, then we ourselves must go through our own time of being crucified ourselves. So brokenness is a requirement for strong, vigorous, passionate preaching. A moist eye and an aching heart provide rare eloquence in preaching. And brokenness comes through trials and testings. And so it's part of the essential preparation that God has for passionate preaching. It's a very hard chapter for us to go through because none of us enjoy going through trials. I know I don't, and I know that you don't. None of us are sadistic in nature, like, afflict me, None of us are like that. Beat me, bruise me. We're not like that. We try to avoid that as much as possible. So this chapter is kind of difficult because we are talking about something that has to happen. Not that it might happen. It has to happen if we're going to become, good, passionate preachers. All right. So this is something that is part of the whole parcel of life, and so we realize that trials are essential. Luther said that it is trials that make a minister. It is the testings that make a minister. So it isn't just theological. Going through seminary and taking the 3-4 years here, that'll teach you, academics. But suffering 101, that's different. All right. Testing 101, that's different. Now you may get it in seminary, you may get it in the process of it, but you may not get it. But to preach, you have to get it. So if you didn't get it before you came to seminary, if you don't get it now, you'll get it afterwards. So simply somewhere it's going to happen to you. Okay, just a matter of the fact that it's going to happen. So it's part of it. And so this is the whole issue that in brokenness, it involves going through trials. Now, it's good for us to know where they come from, the source of trials. Where do they come from? And I've given you a whole list of different references there showing the origin of trials, where they come from, the source of them. And number one, obviously, God. God is directly or indirectly involved in our trials. All right? So they ultimately come from Him, either directly or indirectly. He's directly involved in us, giving us trials, or indirectly using other means, other instruments to come and afflict us. I mean, i.e., Job. Remember Job? God granted permission to Satan for Satan to come and to afflict him. So that was like God was the ultimate source. And then there was the indirect means. People are a source of great trials. By people, I mean godless people, just those that do not know Christ. They're forever making life difficult for us. And this will continue. Now, we as a Christian nation don't face as much of it as our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world where they are minority. And they have great persecution. Okay, we have tons of Christians that are getting killed every year for their faith. We just don't hear about it because it's not something the liberal media wants to bring to the table. They don't want to talk about these things. They talk about other people dying, but not believers dying. But they are, they're being afflicted and put under testing. Sad to say, sometimes we ourselves are the reason for our trials. Okay. Our own stupidity. Am I the only one? Or are there others? Yeah. We commit some really dumb things, and then we pay the price for it. And we pay the price for our mistakes and our errors and stuff that we do that comes back to haunt us. And so we can't always blame God for our problems. We're the source of it. We're the cause of it. Well, why is God punishing me? He's not punishing you. You're punishing yourself. It's your own error. As Jeremiah told the people of Israel, your own sins are punishing you. It isn't God punishing you. It's your own sins are punishing you. So sometimes we are, and our sinful or foolish issues are the source of our afflictions. The church, for the most part, and I say that with qualifiers, the church, for the most part, will be the greatest source of your trials. God's people. Sad to say. Look at all the scars on my back. See them? All those scars. They're not caused by heathens and by sinners. They're caused by Christians, God's people. They really become a source of great trials. It's not anything new. I mean, you read through 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, it wasn't the heathen, even though Paul was persecuted in Corinth, remember that? He doesn't write against the heathens, he writes against the believers, the carnal believers, the false teachers that are persecuting him and cause them problems. So the church, sad to say, can bring you some problems. Not only because they in their foolishness can hurt you, and God's people will hurt you in ways that are incredible. But sometimes just their needs, the sufferings that they go through, you become part of that. And so their sufferings become your sufferings. And so we're invited then to participate in the afflictions of our people, and then they become our afflictions. We weep not for ourselves, we weep because they're weeping. And so we then learn to experience their afflictions. When Paul gives a list, remember the list of all the things that he went through, and sufferings and beatings and all that. He says that, and above all these things, there is upon me the constant care of the churches. Remember that? It's like an added dimension to his sufferings. All the care of the churches out there. Being a church planter and having all these churches at his disposal, they added to all the stuff he was going through. So the church is a cause. Nature. We live in a fallen world. We forget that. I mean, even in America, we live in a great land where we try to minimize as much of the sufferings. But, we live in a fallen world. It's tough. We forget that. Why do bad things happen to good people? You ever ask that question? Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, one of the reasons is because good people live in a fallen world. And so we're not immune from what happens. Do Christians get the flu? Yeah? Or is it just carnal Christians get the flu? Or is it spiritual ones too? See what I'm saying? Just because you're a Christian and you're godly does not mean that we're immune from the stuff that happens here. Do Christians get cancer? Do we get diseases? Do we suffer along with the rest of the crowd that's out there when stuff happens? Is it just the heathens that lost their homes in the fires this summer? Or did believers also lose their homes? Follow me? We live in a fallen world so that when it rains on everybody. And when there's a fire that consumes everything in its way, believers and unbelievers. When there's a flu, we all get it. In other words, so we live in a situation where just by the fact that we live in this world, we're going to experience a great measure of the same stuff that other people experience. We forget that. We think that because we're Christians, we ought to be immune from these things. Then we get upset and mad when we face them. But they're designed. They're designed. This world is hostile. I mean, it's compared to all the other planets, it's like the great place to live. I chuckle when they think about colonizing Mars. You got to be crazy. Why do you want to go to that planet? There's nothing out there. I mean, talk about hostility. There's nothing more hostile than Mars. There's nothing there. It makes our planet look like Disneyland compared to that stuff. And yet, our planet is hostile, and if we don't go through trials, we cannot exist in here. Our astronauts, when they go out there and they spend 6 months out there in outer space, they have to come back and readjust to a hostile world. Their muscles they need to be retoned. Retoned. It's, the whole theme, remember the movie, The War of the Worlds? Remember that one? The War of the Worlds? The whole theme was that these aliens died because they were not accustomed to the hostility of our planet. We're used to diseases. Our bodies have raised, we become immune to certain parasites. They're everywhere, and yet, so we live in a hostile world, and for us to be able to thrive, we need to then be placed through testings. Our children, some of our young parents, I don't want my kids in the nursery because they're going to get sick. Well, friend, they're going to get sick anyway. And it's better for them to get sick now because they build their immunities. Our son was sick every week. Every week he was sick. I mean, every week he got something. First 5-6 years, always in the doctor. Now the dude's never sick. You know what I'm saying? Because he's immune to everything. I mean, he's got every disease, and so he's immune. So part of our, the early trials are for that. So younger parents, think about that. Every time your child gets sick, it's one more thing he's going to build an immunity for. So praise God for that. You shelter them and hide them, keep them from that. Eventually they're going to get it. Then it'll be really, double jeopardy at that time. So that's part of the whole process. And then Satan's involved in that. Satan is involved in, again, the trials that we receive, and we know that he's alive and well, responsible for much of the agony that takes place on this planet. He's called the tempter, and he's a great terrorist. We can add a couple of other things here that helped us in response to trials and testings, and that is our parents. Part of the job that parents have to do is to expose and discipline our children so that they receive the testings and afflictions that they deserve in response to their wickedness and also in preparation for life. I thank my dad that he was rough on me, really rough. Preparation for life. He wanted to raise a son that could, but part of it. Part of my job is, when I taught seminary, part of my job was to afflict you. It was to no mercy. You're saved by grace, but you're taught under law. You know what I'm saying? So it was all law, and Part of my job was to come and afflict you with issues, so to make you tough. You know, in this class, this is like a interim, so I'm real nice to you guys, you know, but you know, because I'm only here for 5 days, and then I won't be back anymore. But if you were my real class, it would be different to be afflicting you. I'd be grading your papers. I'd be giving you rougher exams. I'd be giving you more assignments, etc., because I wanted to, you know, produce a certain type of. I'd be part of the trial process, and our professors are that. Our professors are that, and so the sources of trials. And secondly, there's a whole variety of trials. James 1, remember James 1? And one of the great reminders of the trials and why they exist. And it reminds us, verse 2 and 3, consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And so trials are positive, and they're also all different types of them, various trials. The idea there is varied colored trials, all different types, not all the same. Not all the same. Some for me, some for you, some tailor-made for me, some tailor-made for you, and all these trials that God brings our way. And now there are certain trials that are peculiar to preachers. Let me just focus on those for a few moments. Some that we are going to need and we are going to receive. There's other trials that other people get. If you're a politician, you get certain trials. You're a police officer, certain trials, but certain trials that are peculiar to us as ministries. I was watching a cartoon years ago, and there was 2 deer talking to each other. You ever seen that one? The 2 deer? And then one deer, you turn on his side, and he has a bullseye on his side, built in. And the other deer says to him, "Hey, you know, guy, bummer of a birthmark, huh?" It is, because you're walking around with a bullseye, and they're aiming at you, you know. And so you're the recipient of certain types of trials that come our way. Spirit of God is, in some ways, a one that afflicts us. The Spirit of God does bring conviction. Conviction hurts. Conviction is pain. We see that in the testimony of people that get under conviction in Scripture. And the Spirit of God does bring a sense of discomfort, even depression. Even depression. We may go through times of depression because of conviction for sin, and that's tough. Remember David's testimony in Psalm 32, in Psalm 51. Remember that? How he couldn't sleep at night. How my energy was drained like the fever heat of summer. Remember that? And so this is where, you know, the Spirit of God Himself is going to remind us that our conviction of sin by God Himself is one way that He will be speaking to us. And we preachers are going to be going through some tough times sometimes if we deal with our own weaknesses, our own sins. Okay, so we go back to square one, confession of sin. Remember that? Square one, short accounts with God, all of that, to make sure that we are not living under the tyranny of depression because of looking at our nature. The Word of God itself becomes a source of conviction. You read it. Acts 2:37, remember that? They heard the Word. They were pricked to the heart, cut to the quick because of the Word. It does. It does cut like a knife. And God's using that as a means of reminding us. Sickness, God will use particular sicknesses to teach us. Great example of that is obviously the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, where he had some kind of bodily ailments, a disease of some type, and he prayed to the Lord take it from him, and the Lord said what? No. Because you see, his sickness was a means of perfecting his character, of making a better preacher. And so weakness, is perfected we're perfected by our weaknesses. We're perfected by our sicknesses. the result of our sicknesses make us better people. And so the Apostle Paul then looked at it and said, then most gladly I'll delight. I take pleasure then in my sicknesses, my weaknesses, for then when I am weak, then I am strong. So we are going to be then, have afflictions, have bodily afflictions. Some of you have them. You have bad backs. You have chronic ailments. And whatever you do, they're going to be there. Some of us are going to have them for the rest of our lives. They're just going to be there. They have a reason for that. And the reason that we have them is just like God said. It's going to be there because part of the Lord teaching us to know how to preach to broken people, because we ourselves are also, broken people. I look at my audience, our congregation, almost everybody, without exception, has something going on there. And the older your crowd is, by the way, the more it's there. The more it's there. And so you realize that sickness is something that God is going to send our way. Peculiar to preachers is poverty. Self-imposed poverty. Okay? Most of it is going to be self-imposed poverty, but it's part and parcel of what we go through. Peculiar to us, that we're going to go through these times of not having enough, and it's going to bother you. Well, Paul said, I've learned the secret of not having, of being content, of not having and of having. And so we have to learn that also, learn the secret. But it's a process you go through. It's not fun being poor. It's not fun not having without. It's really tough. And you go through that. You go through those times where you wonder, Lord, how are we going to make it? The anxiety that comes with that. We wish that we could always approach every lack that we have with such absolute confidence that, kind of a George Mueller kind of a guy, We're not George Mueller. We're the other guy, the other George. We're the other George. And it's a wonderful life. We're that George, about to commit suicide because we don't have enough. So, but that God uses that. God uses poverty to really speak to us and help us understand and break us so that we have, we can relate to other folks that are also living in poverty. So that's peculiar. Rejection is also peculiar to us. Rejection. Rejection, the Apostle Paul, rejected by his own people, rejected by the church. Some people in the church. 2 Timothy ends with a, kind of a down, rejected by some companion. Demas has forsaken me. Remember that one? Close companion. And other references to Demas, he's like part of the team. 2 Timothy 4, the guy abandoned Paul when Paul needed him most, left him there hanging. And so we are going to suffer rejection by people. Okay, people, your best friends will reject you. The board rejects you sometimes. The church sometimes rejects you. And that's something that we go through. So it's just part and parcel of what we go through. John gives his testimony when he came to this church, Rich Community. After a while, they didn't want him. Remember that? There was some rejection took place. His own staff turned on him. So he went through that trial. So there's some things that are peculiar to us. We are going to be rejected. There's going to be persecution. Persecution. And Paul, the Lord told the disciples, and as he sent them out, you will be persecuted. Sometimes your own family will persecute you. Your enemies will be your own children, your own parents, your own brothers and sisters. So persecution is going to be there, and we can expect some of that. In America, it's very subtle. All right, preachers, subtle. Not everybody in America loves preachers, especially in certain parts of our world. Preachers are not necessarily persona, that people really love to be around. So they'll persecute you in other places, it's just obvious. I spoke in church planners meeting in 1991 or 92 in Moscow when it first opened up, and I taught a class of 26 church planners. Most of them were like younger guys, like in their 30s and 40s. And almost to the man, they were all sons of preachers whose fathers had been shipped to Siberia and had died in Siberia. And now here they were, preachers starting churches in communist. And then this guy showed up. He was like in his late 60s. He had just been released from 20 years as a prisoner in a Siberian prison camp for the faith. And then he joined the class. There he was. And he was always laughing and smiling and happy. You know, and we used to walk together to lunch and dinner. And I thought to myself, this guy should be teaching the class. What is this yo-yo doing? This guy's been through it. But, I mean, he was just under persecution. And it was like a given thing. And their persecution really affected their lives. The church in Russia was so strong. When the Iron Curtain fell, the Russian Baptist Church of Russia was so strong because the persecution had done something to them. And they were just a totally different people. We're going to be affected by unfaithful people, where your friends will let you down. Your friends will let you down. People that you trusted in them most of all will turn their back on you. And that will happen again and again and again. We trust, by the way, some of your best friends will be right here. Some of your most lifelong friends will be right here. So don't lose that opportunity to get to know each other, develop friendships that are going to last a lifetime. Right here. You'll be a band of brothers. That was coined by one of our previous staff members. He called us the band of brothers. He came from a military background, so, called us the band of brothers. That's what you are. And you're going to be that the rest of your lives. So learn to stay together and stay faithful to one another. There's also deaths. We're going to encounter deaths from various aspects. Death will visit us, and that will be a trial that we're responsible for weddings and also funerals. We dedicate babies and also bury people, and that's tough. Really, we enter into their sorrows. Like Jesus did at Lazarus, that sorrow. I mean, there's very, very few times when Jesus wept. 3 times recorded that he wept. One of them is the death of his friend. So you notice the trial that is. And he groaned, it affected him. Obstacles always obstacles. People say sometimes, so Alex, how's the church going? I said, it's always uphill. It's always uphill. In our staff, we have a discussion. We're either going into a trial, in a trial, or coming out of a trial. Always. If there's a lull, we're saying this is the lull. Anything wrong? Anything bad? No. Nobody's sick. Nobody's dying. Everything's great. Hold on then. Because it won't be long before we're what? Into one. So it's just the way life is. It's what Paul says, a wide open door of ministry is opened up to me, but many adversaries. It's always the but. Wide open door of opportunity for ministry, exciting, but at the same time, obstacles. So that's the way it's going to be. There's always obstacles. Now it's hard for you guys to understand that. You want to graduate, find a church that has no problems. And guess what? They don't exist. Every church has its problems. And if they don't, the minute you get there, you brought them with you, because you're the problem. Okay? All right, so understand that there are no perfect churches, so take a note of that. Now, and obviously Satan is an obstacle creator, and then dissensions is always like people dividing, etc. Think of all the dissensions in the early church. When I was at Talbot, there was always this Reformation idea. Let's get back to the early church. Remember that? The modern church is in chaos. Let's get back to the early church. They do things the way the early church did it. Which one? Which one? Corinth? Which one? Colossians? Which one? The Philippians? The Thessalonians? The Romans? Which one? Yeah, see, they're all full of stuff going on. It's issues. Every church had its problems and its issues. So the issue is it's always taking place. Now, there are effects. The reason why the Lord sends trials and afflictions to us is to break us. He needs to burn the dross out of us. We have dross. We have all the stuff. He has to put us through the millstone. You take the wheat, you put it through the millstone, or you sift it to remove the chaff, all the stuff that doesn't matter, and get down to the pure. And so God has to do that. He's got to put us through the fire, the furnace, to burn the dross out. Those are the trials and afflictions. Taking Hebrew 101 doesn't take the dross out of you. Okay? Taking advanced Greek doesn't take the dross out of you. It doesn't. So trials will do that. Okay? Difficulties will do that. That'll take the dross out of you. And so our impurities are wrapped up in our self-righteousness, self-sufficiency, selfishness, and sometimes even self-worship. And so God has to take those things. He needs to break us, and then weed this stuff out of us. Let's examine for the next few minutes just some of the effects of brokenness. They prepare us for ministry, prepare us to preach with passion. Some of these things. For example, when we endure trials and difficulties, the result is humility. Humility. There's a sense where our self-righteousness or our pride is affected. We all have a sense of pride. Anybody here in the Doctor of Ministry program? Okay. See, the difference between this class and the class across the way, okay, is that you guys, you walk uprightly. See, you have this sense of where, you know what, we are seminarians and we're getting our act together. And so you strut around this campus. Those guys, you watch them, and they're stooped over. You notice that? Like, they used to be like you guys. They're not. They're walking around beaten. They're like thrashed. Or they're taking the Doctor of Ministry, but it means nothing because they've been broken. You see the difference? Because that's what it does. It takes this sense of, I've arrived, I'm the man, I got it together, and that doesn't do it. There's a certain pride that we face, and so God has to take this man and bend him, so that your shoulders now are stooped a little bit. Your nose isn't up in the air, it's more like dragging, sweeping the joint, you know what I'm saying? Because, that's the kind of person that God needs. God is opposed to the what? Proud, but gives grace to who? The humble. See, that's the rule repeated over and over and over again in Scripture. God's opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. When He breaks you, He does that. He removes that from you. I mean, think of Moses. He is called the humblest man in all the world. In the Bible, he's called that. The meekest man in all the world. But think of him. Rejected by his own people, kicked out of Egypt, spent 40 years doing what? Messing with sheep. Think about that. To go from Pharaoh to messing with filthy sheep and goats, that's humbling. I wonder how often he sat there thinking about how it used to be in Egypt, and now he's here, smelling like sheep. And then he takes this crowd of rowdy people, okay, who also reject him. And it's in the discussion of rejection when they said, who's this guy Moses? Who do you think he is? He ain't nobody. It's in that discussion that God steps in and qualifies it. It says, you guys have no business messing with this man. He's the meekest man in all the world. He won't even defend himself. That's how meek he is. Wow, that's powerful. And think of the fact that when we suffer loss, think of Job. Job spends the bulk of his discussion in the book of Job defending his righteousness. Defends it. That's pride. See, he didn't know he had it. Why do righteous people suffer is his big question. Why do righteous people suffer? God, I have no business going through this stuff. You know me. You know me. This is wrong. And when it's all said, by the time chapter 42 comes around, God humbles him. In the previous chapters, just humbles him. So, Job, where were you? Who are you? And Job repents in dust and ashes. That's what he says. So he's totally humble. He's not as righteous as he thought he was. And think of Peter. I'll never, remember? All these other seminary grads may fall, but I'm committed. I will always hold the standard for the master's seminary. That's what Peter said. And what happened a few days later? What happened a few days later? He joined Benny Hinn. Remember, he joined Benny Hinn's operation and cashed in his diploma for a Cadillac. Remember that? So what happened? And God humbled him. God humbled him. He ate crow. And so this is what takes place. God will do that. Notice also, when you're broken, it creates faith. Creates faith, which removes self-sufficiency. Creates faith. And so when he takes us and he just removes all the props from life, when we trust in we trust in our abilities, we trust in our intellect, we trust in what we have, and we don't need God. We don't pray because we don't need God. When Napoleon, on the day of Waterloo, the Battle of Waterloo, that morning, the British were there, the Prussians were coming. He got up to fight the battle, and the chaplain said to Napoleon, "Napoleon, would you like us to pray to God this morning?" Napoleon said, "We don't need to pray today. The British will be destroyed by noon. We don't need God today." What happened to him on Waterloo? Because his philosophy was God is on the side of the largest armies. So he really didn't need God. And so there's defeat. When we behave this way, there's defeat. And so we are taught then to depend upon God. Paul learned to pray more when he was ill. He learned to pray more when he was ill. We pray more when we are lack. Remember that this morning I quoted Deuteronomy 8, man does not live on bread alone. And God said in chapter 8, verse 3, He let you be hungry. He purposely kept you on the verge of starvation. Okay, you're right there on the verge of starvation, just to remind you that you are not self-sufficient. You'll always need to depend upon me. Every morning you have to depend upon me for manna, and every evening for quail and for water. You need me every step of the way. And so he taught them that by breaking them. He let them be hungry. So we're going to be there. We're going to have these obstacles. A broken man learns to depend upon God. And we need to do that. We need to learn to depend upon God for everything. And for that, He's got to break us and put us through these trials. Number 3, notice compassion. We learn compassion as a result of being broken. Removes our selfishness. Compassion is your pain in my heart. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Remember that? 2 Corinthians 1. Blessed be God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who comforts us with all the comfort. And then he says he comforts us so that we will learn to comfort what? Others. So the reason why we suffer is so that we can learn to be comforted by God, so that then we can learn to comfort others. Some of you guys have gone through some huge, you've gone through the mill. You know what it means to hurt and to suffer. Others of us haven't. We're immune. Well, we need to go through that. I gave you the lousy testimony that I gave my wife when I scolded her for weeping because her mom had died. Well, it wasn't until my mother died that I learned compassion. See, and now I went through that, and then so the Lord removed that from me to teach me compassion, so I would learn compassion for other people. So we have personal pain. We have to go through our personal pain so that we will learn to be sympathetic with other people. We have to go through personal pain in our family so that we learn how to comfort. Some of you fellows are married to your wives, and she has issues. She needs your comfort. She needs you to find way for every day to give her a sense of comfort. And that's, some of you have children. We've had seminarians that have children that have chronic illnesses. And you wonder, what is going on here, God? You call me to the ministry, but my child has this illness, from birth, and it's going to be this way for who knows how long. Why? Well, why? Because that is the Lord's special instrument to teach you compassion, to make you a better preacher. So when you go out to minister, it's not designed to hinder you from ministry, see? He's designed to equip you for ministry. So you become a better, more compassionate minister and preacher, because you're going to preach with brokenness. You have to understand what others go through. And so it is. And so we're going to learn compassion from the sufferings of ourselves, of others, even of our own people. Churches go through trials because churches, they go through trials, they bond. If you have to go through trials because of stuff that, either a division or kicked out of a property or financial issues, all those unite the people. They work together. There's a sense where they come out better people. Number four, it also teaches us what I call realism. Realism means that we come to the real world. From time to time we'll talk about that we have believers out there that don't live in the real world. They've been cradled, or your ministry is from an unreal perspective, okay? Anybody single here? Single, yeah, here. You're authorities on marriage, aren't you? They get up and they're going to preach on marriage, Here's a great marriage, and you men should get your act together because you're lousy husbands. But see, he's preaching from the ideal perspective. Wait till he gets married. And he marries Jezebel, and then we got some issues here. Now he's in a real world, Or you're you're newlywed with no kids. Your kids are like, 3 months old, and you're getting up pontificating upon you parents. Your teenagers are rowdy. You need to get them under control and this and that. Yeah, wait till you have yours. Wait till you have yours, and they crucify you. They find you in the bathtub with your throat slit. Where did that come from? That's your teenager. He left his book of 4 laws there in the bathroom. In other words, all of a sudden things change when the real world comes in, and all of a sudden, you're dealing with the real world. And so God has to take us through that to bring us down to the way people really live. Okay. Get out of that. Get out, the way people really live. And we can do that. We come out of Santa Clarita, way up there in Saugus, make your way down here, come to Grace, sit on here, and then go back and never realize that there is a whole community here that lives a totally different life. Totally different life. And then you go to your church and you don't have that. You have a church that basically is like, where did these people come from? And then you want to quit and come back to Grace. You can't. You can't. See? So that's what it puts you in a place where you have, the reality of life. Let's think about then some of the stuff. Joseph. Think of Joseph, one of the great patriarchs, sold into slavery by his own brothers. Talk about a broken family, being raised in a broken environment. That's him. It's him, but he's one of the great patriarchs. Think of Jacob, wrestled with God, and after that, he always walked with a limp. All right? Always walked with a limp, broken. He wrestled with God, but God taught him a real lesson, humbled him. From there on, Think of Samuel, one of the great, great prophets. Samuel, broken by living in Eli's home and seeing all the filth that takes place under the high priest. And then for the people to reject God by rejecting, Samuel and his sons and wanted a king. And then he chose Saul, and then for Saul to reject God. I mean, it was like rejection after rejection after rejection. That's Samuel, and still just a great, great man of God. Think of Job and his unfair sufferings and stuff. Listen, this world, we get to the real world the way things really are. And it's good for us to be there. This is the way, this is the way life is all about. It's a real world. And brokenness does that. Brokenness brings you out of the cocoon and just you begin to live in the way the rest of the world lives. And it's not perfect. And perfection is not necessary for happiness. Say it. You can be happy even though things are not perfect. That's key. It doesn't have to be, don't have to have a perfect marriage to be happy, or a perfect family to be happy, or a perfect church to be happy, because that's the real world. There's nothing perfect, but that's the way it is. Number 5, it makes us sober. Brokenness brings it into a sober type of relationship where we are brought to live in a soberness about this, because sometimes we can live in a worldly manner. We can live in a life that is basically not where it should be, really serious for God, but we've compromised it. We become much like the world. And notice how often God encourages us to live sober, to be sober. Be sober in all things. Live a sober life. Peter emphasizes that again, the idea of be sober, be vigilant, and things along those lines. And we can, and Paul warns us in chapter 6 of 1 Timothy, the whole discussion on the love of money. Remember that? Love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. And we use that. In the context, gentlemen, the context of that covetousness and greediness is really speaking to pastors and Christian leaders. He's not talking to the average yo-yo in the church. He's talking about those that think that godliness is a means of gain. And the word godliness in the context of the pastoral epistles is religion. The religion is a way of gain. That you can get into the ministry as a means of making money, which is an entirely worldly context. And godliness is a means of great gain when accompanied by what? Contentment. So religion, ministry, is a means of great gain with contentment. But if we don't, then it becomes a means by which you and I plunge ourselves into all manner of pain and destruction. And so it's easy for us to become worldly. We don't always talk about worldly pastors or worldly preachers, but they're among us. Yeah. We love the world. We love what the world brings us. And we have them in seminary. Some of you guys are here. You're here, but you're worldly. You love the world. It'll keep you from ministry because you don't want to be otherworldly. And so God is going to do something to break that stuff, to eliminate this holding on to the things of this life, the world. And it creeps on us. It's like barnacles. They grow on us and they affect us, and somehow, it's there. So God wants to take that and burn that dross out. And what he'll do, he will put you through some stuff. All right? It'll mean like losing stuff. You'll lose stuff. Stuff that you love, you'll lose it. And we see that happening. I mean, stuff that you relied upon, it's gone. Money begins to disappear, you love, okay? Stuff that you held on to. And follow me now, gentlemen. Sometimes, if you're not careful, it's not so much you as it is your wife. Your wife becomes this individual And she becomes this Lot's wife. Okay? That though you drag them out of Sodom, her heart is in Sodom. Okay? And so even though but you're yoked together with this individual that somehow is in love with the world. I've had him say to me, Pastor, Professor, we can't go to the ministry because my wife, she don't want to go. She doesn't want to. She doesn't want to be in the ministry. Or she wants to go with her mom where she's at in some other part of the country, and where she don't want to go any place else except where her mom's at. And now we got a problem. Or she wants a house. She wants a house, and unless she gets a house, we can't continue in seminary. Follow what I'm saying? And it's really that's how close it is to this institution. And so we have these issues, these problems, because you see, trials is going to knock that out of us. Okay, we'll come and things will happen. We'll suffer the loss of stuff. And let me just give you a testimony. I was in seminary and living in Orange County. We rented a house in Orange County, my wife and I. We were living out there, and you know that when I came to the ministry, called to the ministry, my desire was to be involved in preaching and ministry in the Hispanic community. That's where I wanted to go back home and minister to my hometown. And yet something happened where worldliness crept in. And I lived in Orange County, upper class community, nice homes, green grass, no gangs, no graffiti, and then we lived in that. And I worked for a company that paid a good wage and supported us through seminary. And one day that company sent us on a delivery trip. And so this truck driver and I made a delivery into East LA. Eastern in Brooklyn. It was the delivery place. I recall like it happened yesterday. And we pulled up to make a delivery, and I sat in the passenger side there looking at the barrio for the first time in a long time. Ghetto. And all the poverty and stuff that was there. And the guy was making a delivery, and I said to myself, I would never come here. I would never come here. Now see, I thought I was a holy and godly man, but worldliness had crept in and had already infected me. And I said that like I would never come here. Brooklyn and Eastern. The armpit of the barrio. Wasn't long after that I walked in one day and the boss said to me, Alex, this is your last day of work. Figure that one out. And I just found out that my wife was expecting a baby. Surprise. We were not planning for it. Surprise. We lived in an apartment where there was a swimming pool and we couldn't live. They didn't allow babies in that first floor. We had to move. Lost my job. And I recall going down and sit in the parking lot in my 67 Volkswagen Fastback, sitting there. God, what am I going to do? I lost my job, and where do I go? But somehow it's like God, I knew God was in it. Well, we lost the job, we lost our apartment, we had to move. He moved us to Montebello, out of Orange County to Montebello, to a parsonage to a defunct church. My job was to take care of the defunct church, just mow the lawn and make sure nobody broke in. And then from there, he moved us. We had to move from there. We moved us to East LA now, about 3 miles from Eastern and Brooklyn. And now we're there in a little tiny house. We're renting for $100 a month, a little white house in the back, working part-time as a visitation minister. I couldn't land a job. I couldn't land a job to pay me anything. And then when we graduated from seminary and that church didn't want to hire us, we went to First Fundamental, which is one mile away from Brooklyn and Eastern. Within 2 years, he took us from Orange County to the armpit that I said I would never go. Figure that one out. He did it by breaking us, I mean, big time. But man, I thank God for that. Man, I thank God for that. And I didn't realize I was so worldly. You can be worldly and not even know it. So God does that. God takes you through stuff and you lose things and you lose positions, whatever, only because he wants you to understand you need to always just live for God and don't let the world come in. Don't let it entice you. Don't go fall for it. Just stay focused on what you'll have opportunities here. You'll be tempted here. Your wife will be tempted. You got to work on that. All right, work on that and just, otherwise, if God really wants you where he wants you, he's going to break you. And just, to strip you of everything and put you where he wants to put you. Trials also produce righteous indignation. We need to have righteous indignation. That's passion. To get uptight about stuff that happens to other people. Some of you, you've gone through trials. You look back at your life and man, it's the pit. By the way, follow me. Our culture is so wacko because we look at rough times in our past and we think it's always bad and negative. It affects us, and so we have this crippled psyche, crippled personality, because we had a bad time in childhood. We had 3 kids, and I was the middle kid. So so my life is all wacko because I'm the middle kid, and so the reason why I'm so dysfunctional is because I'm the middle kid. Shut up. And so we do that. I lived raised in a broken home, or raised in poverty, or and then that cripples us for life. No, it's not. That's not why it happens. It's all designed to produce character. It's all designed to make us better people as a result of that. You see, and in sense, there's a sense of the abuses that you received as a child or as an unbeliever provoke you to passion, to do something about it. They don't cripple you. They just put into you a righteous indignation. Like I spoke the other day about my passion against drinking. It does that. Produce something in there, and also other stuff that takes place. When others are abused, it provokes you to righteous indignation. Think of Paul and how he was aroused by false teachers. I mean, look at Galatians. Galatians is like fire. He's on fire. Every other epistle begins with, Paul and blessings and loving, and Galatians begins and ends with fire. I mean, there's a knife that comes out, there's a knife when it ends. It's like, what? Because he's upset. He's passionate because people are abusing the gospel and abusing the saints. Think of Jude. I sat down to write you guys a real nice letter to encouragement, and then I heard about false teachers, and I changed my whole message. And then there's Jude. And Jude, you get done with Jude, and you don't even want to read through Jude. Because he's just on fire. He's using expression. You look at the Greek text in Jude, and man, whoa, this dude is like passionate. Why? Against false teachers. So it does that to you. Complacency, ignorance. One of the most scathing sermons that Jesus ever preached is Matthew 23. People say, Jesus is so loving, you should imitate the love of Christ. You never read Matthew 23. You never have read that. And that is on the abuse of the leadership on ignorant people. Yeah. Listen, whatever they tell you, do, but don't do as they do. Because they are hypocrites. And they will take your grandma and strip her naked and leave her penniless. They will do that under the cloak of religion. Watch out for these people. You see, and he just unleashed on these people righteous indignation. See, That's what it. Look at the temple. He walked into the temple, saw the people selling and animals, and man, he just took up a whip and just righteous indignation, beat them out of there. That's what happens. See, and when you see others going through brokenness, when you've been broken, when you've been abused, when that stuff happens to you, it does something to you. Where you don't just cower in some little corner or sit in somebody's couch and then cry because somehow you had a bad. That's not what you do. You realize that this is all part of God's preparation for you for such a time as this, to get out and do something. So don't be one of these wimpy preachers that somehow always feeling sorry for yourself, that you just had a hard young people, that your dad never said I loved you, that your dad never pampered you, he never took you fishing, he didn't play baseball with you, he didn't buy you a brand new Porsche, shut up, suck it up. Come on. And let me also say that brokenness also provides this holy boldness. Holy boldness. Life, when you live life on the edge, it produces a boldness in you that it's hard to duplicate. That's why when you live in poverty or close to death, etc., it changes. Look at Paul. Look how bold Paul was. When you read his testimony, beaten 3 times with whips, stoned a couple of times, and in danger of thieves, in danger of his countrymen, danger of robbers and all that stuff. And that produced a really bold preacher, afraid of nobody. Not even ocean storms, nothing. It's unfazed, because he lived on the edge. I had a dear brother whose wife had cancer, terminal cancer, and he said to me, Pastor, it's amazing how bold my wife has become. She's afraid of nothing. Well, see, when you are facing death, you've already faced the ultimate enemy. And if you conquer that, there's nothing else to be afraid of. And so when you're there or you face that, it creates a certain degree of boldness. That's why, you ever heard of the Great Generation? Who's the Great Generation? The World War II. That is the Depression era people is called the Great Depression, the Great Generation, because they went through the Great Depression and the Great Wars. So when they came out of that, you're looking at feeding people. They've been through poverty. My dad was my dad became a hobo. They had no food, they had nothing. In his early 20s, became a hobo. Got on a train, traveled across the country as a hobo. He says they were no place to eat. They were dumped in Barstow one year. He says they dumped them in Barstow, kicked them off the train, and there they almost froze to death. They had to dig into the sand up to their neck, and just to keep from dying and freezing to death. And he's part of that culture. Afraid of nothing, just bold, and had just deep compassion. That guy was compassionate. We used to ride together up and down the Central Valley, because he was a foreman. He used to work on the agricultural stuff, and we'd ride together. And he would always pick up hitchhikers. He'd just pull over and pick them up, and then he would put me in the back seat, and the hitchhiker would be in the front seat. And then he would say, can you drive? He goes, yeah, why don't you drive? He'd let the hitchhiker drive. And my dad would fall asleep. And I'd be in the back seat like wide awake, like, what's going on here? And why would he ever do something like it? But see, he was a great generation, and how many times was he on the road hitchhiking? How many hours and hours and hours and part of his life did he spend thumbing it? And so he could sympathize with these people. That's why he picked them up, because he knew what it was like to hitchhike and for someone to pick him up. And so it changed the whole attitude, you know. Not that I pick them up all the time, but just changes your life. See, when you live on the edge, when you live on the edge, when you live in some of you are going to be going into the inner city, into the large cities. They're different. They're different. You can't be afraid of them. You can't be afraid of what's going on. And so when you're in this, it does this to you. And then look at number 8 there. It also produces endurance. Trials produce endurance. They remove softness. Someone said tough times produces what? Tough people. Tough times produce tough people. Right now we have a general just lack of perseverance in the ministry. We have all these guys quitting, you know, leaving, they resign because they just don't have perseverance. It gets tough. The ministry does get tough. It gets lonely. Okay, there's sorrows out there, there's issues, but listen, the whole purpose for God breaking us is to make us tough, to make us persevere. And that's what, you know, when God prepared John the Baptist, he prepared that kind of man, a man that was going to be some guy to introduce Christ. And he was raised in the wilderness, tough times, tough environment, because he needed to be a prophet of God and stand up to the stuff that was taking place. And so John the Baptist came as a result of just tough times that produced this kind of tough guy. And Jesus the same way. He was raised in the same environment. So, fellows, some of us are just weak. We have all across America this feminizing of the American male. Even just the other day, yesterday I was on the radio, and they have these whole institutions that are trying to, you know, demasculize our men. I mean, you know, feminize them. It's in the culture. They want these soft, effeminate people. And the ministry can't have that. You've got to be tough. You've got to persevere. You can't just give up. And so this is why he's going to put us through some tough times. It's going to be tough going through seminary. You know, you're going to want to quit. Don't. Hang in there. You don't want to throw in the towel. Don't throw in the towel. Just stay the course. And the tough times you have is to do that. You know, just put yourself into that mentality. Lord, you got to make me tough. Make me tough. And so that you don't quit. You don't give up. We have a motto when I was here. We have a motto when it came to preaching. You always show up. No matter when it comes to preaching, you always show up. Don't call in sick, crawl in sick. Yeah. That's some Twinkie seminarian came into class one day. He said, you know, so where's your homework? Oh, Pastor, I didn't get it done. Why? Well, my wife had a baby last night. Really? Well, that's her excuse. What's your excuse? What's your excuse? She had the baby. What's your problem? Don't get Twinkie on me. Well, I couldn't come to work because it was my birthday. Your birthday? What kind of diaper-wearing seminarian are you? Come on. You'd be surprised how Twinkie and weak and effeminate men have become today. And we need tough times. We need toughness. And God is doing that for us. And that's why he's breaking us so that we can become these guys that just don't quit. You know, they show up. My hero was Whitfield. Whitfield, you know, he was really sick toward the end of his life. And they carried him from pulpit to pulpit. He was so sick they had to carry him on a stretcher. And then they would stand him up at the pulpit. He'd stand up and then he would preach his sermon. And then he would swoon back and they would catch him and put him in the stretcher and take him to the next venue to preach. On his deathbed. And people were down there mourning him. And when he's dying, he got up and he preached to them. And then he died. I said, orale, that's what I want to be. Yeah. I got my back hurts, so I couldn't go to church today. Shut up. Preach and then die. You know what I'm saying? That's your motto. Yeah. Anyway, so then, but it's, you know, we don't like afflictions. We don't like problems. We don't like difficulties. You know, I don't like them, but you know they're necessary. They're necessary. You gotta heat the iron to produce the steel. And so you're the iron that's going to be heated by God to produce the steel that'll have the ability then to be compassionate and preach with passion to those around you. Okay? We'll take a question or two, if you have one. All right. If not, then yes, back there.
Going back to the sickness, the various trials, the number 3 is sickness. You mentioned 2 Corinthians. I had a question on 1 Corinthians 11, the communion, where.
Could you talk louder, please?
Yeah. So in a lot of churches, when we go over communion, before I received from the Lord that which I was delivered to you, it's usually there's a lot of churches that cite verses 23 through 29. But I was curious why they just stop there and don't preach from verses 30 to 30, from 23 through 32, because Paul says, for this reason, many among you are weak and sick, and the numbers sleep. Like, I understand that particular situation, Paul was saying, because you're not judging yourselves rightly and dealing with sin before you come to, you're treating it irreverently. Like, it's like God's judgment on you, that when you're sick and die. And I'm just curious, like, I feel like that situation will be applied to us today as well. It's the same concept. So why do many preachers leave that out, or should we preach that whole verses 23 through 32 instead of to 29?
The question concerning in the discussion on the Lord's Supper in Corinthians, it surfaced because there were problems in the church and in the order of worship. The communion was being abused, obviously. Instead of taking the Lord's Supper and doing it properly, it became just a party time and very, very partial time, where the rich enjoyed the great time, the great food, and the poor came and they were hungry. So unity and the holiness and it wasn't being recognized. And the result of them abusing the Lord's Supper was that God was judging them, and with illnesses, and also with death. Some of them were dying because of God's judgment upon them. And so the whole exhortation is not just to observe the Lord's Supper, but to examine yourself. Examine yourself to make sure that we're coming to the table in the right fashion. Sometimes in the Lord's Supper, because we only emphasize certain stuff, we don't always put the context of why we do it, and the importance of looking at ourselves to make sure that we are partaking of the Lord's table in the right way. Otherwise, there is a judgment that comes upon God's people. Still applies today because of that. So I think as we serve the Lord's Supper from time to time, we need to bring the context in and remind people to examine themselves. Absolutely. Thank you.
Could you speak maybe a little bit about the calling and the quitting, the ministry, maybe quitting obviously in the manner in which God hasn't proposed you to do, but how men say, I'm called, and they jump out with passion, but yet they quit.
And quitting the ministry, there will be times when you will disqualify yourself and you have to quit.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the best thing to quit. There are times when there's a crisis in the home where you have to take time out and not quit the entire call, but to quit the present ministry to handle stuff. Sometimes it happens with our kids. Sometimes a daughter may be going through some really issues. She's involved with a guy, and you have to leave the area. You have to move out to save her life and et cetera. That's drastic, and that can happen from time to time. And so you don't quit the ministry, you quit the job for now, this one, because you don't want to jeopardize them or your family. You need to go and do something else. You quit the ministry if you disqualify you with sin, then you're out. Obviously, you're out, and that you just have to rebuild your life and rebuild your marriage or rebuild whatever it is that fell apart. But the only time you really quit is if you know that God wants you to quit, that you're done. I mean, that's.
What happens if you do? We say you're called, but then within a couple of years that you quit, and it's not that any of what you just stated.
When they're a couple of years after you start and you quit,
Yeah, is that person called?
maybe they were never called. Maybe maybe you were never called.
That's kind of wanted you to talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that.
Yeah, and that you're going to find that out because you have to go back to the evidences of call to the ministry. Is it a heart's desire?
Right.
Is there fruit in my life? Do others affirm it? You never quit by yourself. A rule of thumb: you never quit in the middle of the semester. Say it. Yeah, don't be a yo-yo and wimp out. You know, 8th week, I fell behind in Hebrew, I fell behind in Greek, I think I'm going to quit. No, you finish the class. Finish the class, and then you quit. Finish the semester, then you walk in, and then you quit. Never quit on Monday. Never resign on Monday from seminary, from preaching. No, we're all bummed out on Monday. Everybody is. No, you quit. You quit when everything, on Friday. You look at Friday, and then you talk to the elders about that. You don't just quit. You have others confirm that you ought to quit. Walk around, talk to people. Should I quit? No, shut up. Get your act together. No, what do you want to, or they say, yeah, you're done. You should be. See, you don't just. It isn't something you do. Talk to make sure your wife is in on it. Okay, because sometimes she's there to, and if your wife is listening, she has only one job to do. Okay, your wife has one major job. Okay, here it is. Her job is to keep you motivated. That's her main job. Her job is to minister to the minister, to make sure that she's the guy in the corner in the boxing ring. Remember that guy? She's the guy there slapping the dude, giving him water and saying, you got him, you got him. This, come on, go get him, champ. This is your, go get him. That's her job to keep him going. That's her job. And hope she's like that. Don't be like the wife that said to the guy, the guy that in the corner said, come on, champ. The guy has not laid a glove on you. You've got it. Then he said, well, then you better watch the referee because someone's beating the daylights out of him. Okay. So her job is to wind you up every single day and keep you going. That's her job. For you to come to seminary, to open your lunchbox, and there it is, a lunch made by her with a note that says, I love you, stay the course, champ. And then sign her. That's her job. Okay? So that, yeah.
Just on brokenness, one thing that, just a question. Obviously, we don't pick how God applies this. We don't pick the source or the ways in which He brings these particular things to our lives. What is a way that we can be setting our hearts and minds right to not necessarily be praying every night, all right, Lord, I need brokenness, so please kill family members, right. So what's the right approach that we can come so that we are, one, prepared for brokenness, but also making sure that we're aware when those things come and we handle them the right way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the result of this class this morning, just knowing that it's a prerequisite for it, right. Then you realize that it's part and parcel. So I want to maximize the lesson that's being taught and come out maximizing the lesson so I don't have to repeat it again. I think that's part of it, not to find some other lame excuse to justify or whatever, but just to realize this is just part of my preparation for ministry, and so, Lord, thank you. The other one is adronisese. Adronisese is found in 1 Corinthians 15 or 16, where Paul tells the Corinthians, play the man. Play the man. And you got to tell yourself that. Play the man. Man up. Man up. And you remind yourself of that, and you realize that that's what God is wanting for preachers, is to play the man up, so that you bite your teeth and you grind and you just go to it. Yeah. Listen, all of us are going to get straight A's in seminary. We're not, and this is not to justify. We're not. There's some of you guys, young, I forget your name. Yeah, young guy, single, no children, no wife. I mean, intelligent. 4.0 right here. 4.0. Right. Same thing over here. This guy's married, 3 kids. 3 kids. Different story. You just do the best you can. This guy made 4.8. You made 2.8, 3 point. You know what I'm saying? That's great. I mean, there's no comparison. You both finish. Play the man. Just man up. Get done. And that's all God expects of you. See, we're all in this thing together, and just remind yourself, play the man. Play the man. And whenever you go through it and you feel like feeling sorry for yourself, just look in the mirror and play the man. Come on, Montoya, come on, you lazy bum, I go jogging it. I try and run 15 to 20 miles a week, and sometimes I don't. This carcass don't want to do it, And I tell this carcass, you're going. But my leg hurts too bad. Let's get on with it. But there's no buts about it. Come on, carcass, you're going to do it. So you play the man, see? So in other words, you remind yourself of that. All right, gentlemen, we see you mañana. Yes, sir.
In relation to the different trials that could come, oftentimes it seems like the trials will attack the family, not necessarily the man. And I'm just trying to discern when you tell your wife, man up, or when you tell her, man, we need to figure out a different solution. I mean, kids are going through some trial together. And what is the process that you think through when it's time to man up and dig down, or it's time to pull up and reconsider where you're at?
Yeah, this is what God will teach us as we go through these trials. To teach us, to give us the discernment. Do they need compassion? Do they need more support? Do they need someone to come alongside and just reaffirm them? Okay, or do they need just a gentle rebuke? Gentle rebuke or reminder along those lines. So, knowing the difference, does my wife, do my children need a more compassionate approach of encouragement, of reminder, compassion, weeping with them? Or do I need to just remind them, but you know what, come on, let's look at this from the right perspective. And so asking God for that kind of wisdom. And going through these trials hopefully will give us an ability to do that, how to do that. And you're starting to do that will help you as well. It's not always easy. Not always easy, especially with your own family or your own kids to do that. But so it calls for some wisdom and some experience along these lines. It's a great question. Yeah. Okay, we'll stop here. Is it time? Am I ahead or what? Oh yeah, we're an hour. Yeah, we have time for a lot of questions. Yeah, we have time for a lot of questions. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was looking at the clock the wrong way. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I recently spoke to a former pastor who pastored in Russia, and then about 10 years ago he came to America. And he said when he went into ministry, the church could barely afford it. And he gave all he can for about 15 years. And it says he was able to live in a very poor atmosphere, family in one room, all through that. And he was kind of saying that if you're not financially stable, you should not go into ministry. I mean, he says, now I'm trying to kind of catch up to my living situation. Eventually he came to America. It's a different lifestyle. He's not a pastor. Would you say he's not called, or what would you, I mean, it was kind of, he was not encouraging me to move in and move forward with ministry unless I have something under my feet.
No, not necessarily. We talked about that the other day of living, always live within your means. And we always, providing for ourselves is a display of faith. If a man does not provide for his own and for those of his own household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. So even as ministers, as preachers, we need to make sure that our families are properly taken care of. Now, the whole idea here is to learn to live within your means and to learn to do that wisely. That's always the best thing. We can always adjust our lifestyles to a certain degree to live within our means. Okay, we can learn to do that. And so this is the goal in ministry, to be able to take your lifestyle and whatever is given to you, to learn to live within your means. And your wife is into that, and your children, yourself, always live within your means. We can always adjust. It's an amazing thing that we can do to do that. If obviously the church does not provide us even enough to meet our needs, then we do what the brother, I think you raised the question on tent making. Get in a job on the side to help you. That's also an option, to get a job on the side. Paul made tents. Remember that? Paul made tents. And when he was with Aquila and Priscilla, he joined them in their tent-making outfit. And I think it's chapter 14 of Acts or 17, I forget what it is. He devotes himself, he meets with them, they start making tents. Then his companions come, and the Bible says there, the text says, and so when they came, he devoted himself more to the ministry. Between the lines is that they brought an offering, that he didn't have to spend time making tents, because now the churches in Macedonia were helping him with his livelihood. So I would say, gentlemen, first of all, now that you're in here, learn to live within your means. Just tone everything down. Tone everything down, and just learn not to live we live in a consumer-based society. Okay? We're a consumer-based society, which means our country exists on consumers. If you don't consume, they blow. So they want us to consume so that they can live high on the hog. And we can't do that. So you need to learn to react against that and not become consumer-oriented, but become rather, what do I need to live and to get the job done? And so you work on that. Okay, and then, when my wife and I moved when we got married, I got married and we were living in this, we moved in and we bought all our furniture. I furnished the entire apartment, bedroom, kitchen, living room, for $250. Everything. I went to a used furniture place, okay, and I bought everything that I needed for $250. And so we started we got married, and that's what I paid for that. That's how we lived. We drove a 1965 Dodge Dart. One of my classmates gave us. He said, "This is for your wife." A 65 Dodge Dart slant 6. Dependable as a Dodge. That was the motto of the 65 Dodge Dart. That thing ran forever. It just would go and go and go. My philosophy with cars is this. I'm like the American Indian. I ride the horse until it dies, then I eat it. You know what I'm saying? And so that 65 Dodge, we rode it till the kids said, Daddy, don't drop us in front of the school. 2 blocks away, please. I drove that 65 Dodge to the Master's Seminary when I was hired. I drove for 2 years. He brought us here. And it's still out there someplace, still running. We had to give it away. It's still running. See, you have an attitude where somehow you live like that. We couldn't reupholster the car, so my wife had to sew the liner inside the car just to keep it so that it's presentable. You know, that's how you always live within your means. You live this way, and if you learn to do that, you'll always have enough. And if you don't have, if the church can't give you just enough, then you get a side job to help you with the enough, okay? Not to become a consumer, but to give you enough. Friend, I am so embarrassed. I mean, I don't own an iPhone. This is as close as I get to it. You know what I'm saying? I'm embarrassed because I was at McDonald's and there's some illegal alien having been out, we pulled out his huge iPhone. This dude is like high on the hog, and here I am, you know, with and just in case that doesn't work, I carry sticks and a blanket in my trunk of the car for smoke signals in case, you know, that doesn't work. See, you don't have to have all this stuff. You don't. You know what I'm saying? Don't subsidize somebody else's lifestyle to jeopardize your ministry. Does that make sense? So I would say, you know, you don't have to have everything laid out before you go into ministry. Just make sure that you can afford and go in and ultimately teach. If you teach the people the right principles. But let me back it up a little bit. I think this is an axiom. Every culture that is self-sufficient is able to eventually provide for their pastors that they can minister full time. Any culture that's self-sufficient can do that. So wherever it is. For example, our Hispanic pastors here in LA. To be an Anglo pastor in Lake Santa Clarita or Pasadena or here, you need probably close to $100,000 a year salary to afford to buy a house here and to minister here. You're looking at California, this is LA. If you're going to live in Burbank, in Pasadena, average home is $550,000 for a 2-bedroom house. Okay. Hispanics, $25,000. For $25,000, 25 to 30, you can live in LA, in this area,
With family.
and live comfortably. Know the difference? So if you're a Hispanic pastor and you want to get paid $100,000 by a Hispanic church, good luck. You ain't going to do it. But if you want to minister, it's possible. It's possible. But your lifestyle will be different. It'll be a different lifestyle. You'll be living differently. And it doesn't mean that you'll always stay there. You'll start there, and it'll grow based upon the way you disciple and encourage your people. Okay, so every culture is, every culture that's self-sufficient is able to fully supply, eventually, their pastors. So if you just begin to work things together and start this whole process, there are key things that you can be looking long-term as you work through. Sometimes your wife is able to work. Sometimes we paint ourselves into a corner by saying that a wife should never work. If the wife works, she's in sin. Well, friend, that is not biblical. That is not biblical. The most admired woman in the whole Bible is the excellent woman found in Proverbs 31. What's that? She had her own business. She even had her own business. Did she work? Boy, did she work. That's in other words, yeah, right. So we get into this theology that puts us so here you are, you get married, you married a wife, right? And then you don't want her to work. But there are no kids. It's only you. You want her to stay home and just wait for you till you get home from seminary. While you're struggling to go to seminary, and then you got to work, so you're working 30 hours a week and going to seminary, and she stays home doing what? Polishing a 1-bedroom apartment? Cooking what? See, when she should be working part-time or whatever, to free you to work less, spend more time together, and be able to pay your bills and be more. See, I don't want to jeopardize your theology, but let's put it where it should be. You know what I'm saying? Where it should be, and not make it more difficult for us by assuming a lifestyle that just doesn't do it. And since you're provoking me to love and good deeds, let me add something else, okay? Sometimes we say, well, the pastor should get married, but his wife, her job in the church is only to take care of the kids and minister to the husband, and she's not responsible to do anything else in the church, not to run the women's ministries or anything else. That's her only job. Friend, you're a yo-yo if you think this way. That'll never do. Now, that only happens in highfalutin churches that have millions of dollars and they pay big time money to them and staff. But the average church, everybody ministers. And if you're ever going to get the church to become at that level, your wife has to be involved in stuff. My wife used to go soul winning with me. We'd take the kids. She'd take the kids soul winning. We'd go soul winning. She'd be responsible for the women's ministries. She sang in the choir. We cleaned the bathrooms. Okay, we vacuumed. I mean, she was in it because we needed to build the church. So you don't have this luxury of your wife sitting home while you're starving half to death, and the church follows the same example. None of the women want to work. So then nobody wants to work. Now we got major problems. No, we're mom and pop stores. Remember that? We're mom and pop stores. We're mom and pop stores, mama and pop both work. Kids included sometimes. And so this is the real world when it comes to ministry. Have your wife be a part of that. She can still do what she needs to be done, but include her in the growing the church process so that the sooner it grows, then the sooner the church becomes self-sufficient, and then is able to take care of you. And it will take care of you. It will provide for you. I have that phone because that's my choice. I mean, I still think this way. You know what I'm saying? But if they had their way, come on, Pastor, what is it? Shut up. Get your act together. But that's just me. My wife has the iPhone, by the way. She's the one that, she's in that category. Yeah. So I need to pray for her. She's getting kind of worldly. Yeah. Okay. Does that answer your question? Okay. We have
And you have a very delicate topic to talk about because we were talking about obstacles, and one of the major obstacles are in the church. Ecclesiastes 4:4 says that every work made with excellence is going to waste the envy. What kind of advice would you have when a pastor or a student as us is having a calling and another pastor in a higher position is envy? For example, I understand that Spurgeon had a problem. There was a pastor in London, and when Spurgeon got to London, he was attacked by this pastor. A lot of people are willing to serve the Lord, and another pastor is going to push down that calling. And that makes us sometimes to plant a seed of doubt in the calling of the new servant. What will you be your position in two ways? Since you were a young pastor and from your age, when you locate a new guy full of the fire of the Lord, how do you deal with that envy?
Okay, that's a broad statement, but very true. Envy does exist in the ministry. Now we saw it in Philippians 1. Remember Philippians 1? Paul in prison writing and says, my imprisonment has created some issues here. They're being provoked to ministry. My imprisonment has opened opportunity for ministry. Some minister from goodwill. They see us an opportunity. I'm not there. Others minister out of what? Envy, wishing to do harm to me by showing me up. Paul said I could care less. As long as Christ is preached, I'm fine with that. So He was able to rise above the little envy stuff that takes place. As far as he's concerned, as long as the job gets done and God gets the glory, doesn't matter who gets the credit. You want to get the credit? Go ahead. But as long as the job gets done, God gets glorified. But envy does exist, and unfortunately, it creates some issues and problems with us when it comes to ministry. Sometimes, gentlemen, and this is just an observation, you may be in places where the whole purpose of senior pastors and others that are in seminary is to help you succeed and to grow and become all that God wants you to be. Sometimes when you are in seminary and you start in church someplace, the church becomes more important than the seminary. And sometimes the pastor may tell you, your ministry is more important than you going to seminary. So I want you to be more involved in church and not in seminary. Now, you may not even be a paid person for that. You need to realize that if God called you here, then seminary is your priority. That's why God called you here. There are people out there waiting for you to finish to go and minister to them. Coming to my church and minister to me is not your priority. You can be there, you can minister, but you finishing is your priority. That's the priority. Because you got to get out and be involved in ministry. Sometimes as pastor we use seminarians, we use people for our own advancement. We use it at their expense. They should never do that. We should never use a seminarian at their expense. It should always be for their benefit. And so you always be promoting that and encouraging that. So we want to be careful that we don't get involved in churches to the point where we stop doing well in seminary or postpone seminary. You don't want to postpone seminary. Now, if you're a young buck, okay, you're a young buck, you're not married, you have time to postpone seminary. But if you're married, have 3 kids, you can't go on indefinitely here. You're dropping in how much per year? 12 grand and plus living expenses. That's huge. The more you delay that, the heavier it gets. So you want to then get out there and finish and then go where God calls you to do. So sometimes, unfortunately, we pastors take seminarians and use them and abuse them, make them feel guilty. A guilt trip because ministry is so important. But no, seminary is important. If you say to the pastor, I got an exam this next week, finals next week, I need some time off, from some of the stuff, absolutely. It's finals time, you need extra time, go to it. But if we say, no, it's, ministry is first, God is first. No, why the guilt trip? God is first. God brought me to seminary, that's God. That's first. And then, the church will survive with or without me. We'll make it. So it's important to keep that perspective. Now, sometimes among churches, among pastors, we don't like to see others succeeding. We don't always rejoice when others succeed. And we sometimes start killing each other off. We criticize our friends. We always find out who your friends are. Find out who it is that's on your team. Find out who it is that basically is preaching a message that's going to heaven, and then those are your friends. And be careful in blowing up their ships. Okay, blowing up their ships. I recall hearing a story about John Wesley and George Whitefield, when George Whitefield died. And they asked Mr. Wesley, do you think that Mr. Whitefield went to heaven? You think you'll see George Whitefield in heaven? And John Wesley said, no, I won't see him in heaven. Oh, he says, so you don't think he was saved and went to heaven? Oh, no, he was saved. And he was such a godly man that he'll be so close to Jesus and I'll be so far from Jesus, I'll never see George. I like that attitude. I like that attitude, to just really look at fellow ministers and rejoice with them. So if you're in a church and you have 100 people, and a guy down the street comes and he's preaching the same message you're preaching, each church begins to grow and double, 1,000 people. Don't be jealous. Praise God. Hey, we have a 1,000 and my 100, we have 1,100 people here that know Christ. Their 1,000 and our 100 makes 1,100. That's how you look at it. Praise God. See, instead of saying, oh, yeah, they're growing because they're compromising the message. They have synthesizers in the church. The guy doesn't wear a tie. You know, he's the new kind of guy from the Master Seminary, no tie. You don't want to go there. No, you don't want to. You don't want to do that. You want to say, yeah. No, the Mormon guy across the street, different story. You get grenades, throw them in the church, like this. I mean, JW's, different ball game, Benny Hinn, all them other crowd. But the friends, you don't want to be jealous of the friends. Okay, there's so much to do. So much to do that we just need to praise God for one another, and include them into part of your stuff. And envy is there, jealousy. We are exhorted by the Apostle Paul, do nothing from jealousy or empty conceit. Okay, envy them in as well. So learn that in regards to your life. Be careful that in your ministry that you're not just being used by somebody. You need to. So, gentlemen, you need to always be under ministry where they are giving you opportunities to grow and exercise, etc. If where you're at in the next 3 or 4 years, if you're never going to preach, if you're never going to teach, then you got no business being there. We have a internship program in our church for those that are in seminary, and by the 2nd and 3rd year, they are teaching and preaching. They will be baptizing people in our church. They'll be doing all the stuff that pastors need to do. Okay, we'll turn over the pulpit to them from time to time for them to preach because that's what it's all about. Then we don't want them in the parking lot, parking cars as a seminarian. I can get pagans to park the parking lot. I don't need seminarians to do that. I need seminarians that are going to be winning souls to Christ and preaching and baptizing and things like that. So if where you're at, you're not going to have that experience, move around and find some place where the man will tell you, someday you're going to be preaching and I want you to get the experience of all this stuff so that when you go out, you already have this experience and you're doing this stuff, doing ministry. Does that make sense? Yeah, so you're here, you want to get in the water before you go out and do that kind of stuff. Does that answer your help? Okay. We have time for some questions, gentlemen. Yeah. But anything. Yeah.
I know it's not unusual for churches to do this, but you mentioned that your church does it as well, night service on Sunday and also a midweek on Wednesday. Just curious to know the rationale on why you would encourage that or discourage that if you're trying to get away from it, or I guess behind having that.
Okay, good question. What about Wednesday night or Sunday night? We are basically old school. Our church is old school. The traditions. When we came to First Fundamental, they had a morning service, an evening service, and a Wednesday night prayer meeting. That's what they had. And so we just adopted that and then modified Wednesday night into a family night where we disciple children as well. So we adopted eventually the Awana ministry on Wednesday nights, and it eventually became a great night for us to have a good children's program and a youth program on Wednesday nights. And then we made it a family night so that we wanted everything done on one night, not have every night something going on. So we all come together at one night, Wednesday night. Our choir practices Wednesday night. Our youth meets Wednesday night. Our children meet Wednesday night. We have a preaching service on Wednesday night because our Awana program is not a daycare program. It is a discipleship program. So parents that bring their kids to Awana need to be in service. They can't just drop and then go to the gym or drop them off and go shopping. They have to come and then be in service as their kids are being discipled. We have a Spanish-speaking service for parents that are Spanish-speaking. We have our drug rehab program on Wednesday night as well for those that are experiencing drug addiction or alcohol and drugs and help them with that. We'll all come together at one time. We have children, we have babysitting for the infants and the whole thing. And we do that because then it's a way for us to continue teaching the Word of God, just another venue. Sunday night is a carryover from what we used to do. It's the most difficult service to do because it's like so many interruptions and it's not always most well attended. We probably get 2/3 of our total Sunday morning come on Wednesday night. And maybe 20% come on Sunday night. But it's a venue that come, and so as long as we're able to, they want to be coming on Sunday nights, we'll do it. It's the most difficult service of the week because people are very busy. Our Sunday morning is very busy. By Sunday night, people are just tired, exhausted, and they just don't come back Sunday night. But as long as we average maybe 100 to 120 for our evening service, from 700 to 800 in the morning to 100, combined with Spanish and kids, probably 200 in the evening. It's another opportunity to advance the cause of Christ, and as long as they want it, I'll be there for them. It's just another way to. It doesn't hinder my life. I don't mind preaching Sunday nights if I'll do it. So if they're there, we'll do it. Now, if it was just the old guard coming Sunday nights, it was just the deacons, the elders, and all the teachers who came out of loyalty just to be there, I would call time out. I said, you know what, we don't need to do that. You guys are all busy. You've had a full morning, tired, exhausted. Let's go home. But it isn't. It's like all these new people, folks that don't have evening service, come to our evening service. Young people come and hear the Word of God. So as long as we have that kind of response, I'm more than excited to be there and share the Word of God with them. We're a lay-run ministry. We only have three staff. We have 2 full-time staff pastors and 1 part-time staff pastor. Everything else is lay-run. Everything is lay-run. We have a couple of secretaries during the week that run the office, but otherwise everybody is lay-run. Our worship, our youth programs, our youth workers, and that's the way we want it to be that way. It evolved because of our low financial. We couldn't afford people, but it became a great model to have, and so now it becomes a lay-run ministry. So I would say, if the people respond and if you're able to not make it a hardship, then it's great. If it becomes a hardship, it becomes counterproductive, because now it's taking the same people coming and it's a hardship for them. Why penalize them when they could be resting and regathering their batteries and going on? But if it becomes where they want to come, they're looking forward to it, hey, why not? Let's go to it. And you can make it work. Some are doing because of the way things are happening, because some, for example, the Central Valley, some of the desert portions, people take the weekends in the summertime and they go to the mountains. So they're never there on Sundays. They're up there. So this guy's having a weekday service where he just repeats the Sunday morning service during the week for this crowd that is out away from the city on Sundays. Okay, so they modify that. Some Hispanic churches, for example, that are on the lower economic, where they can't go to Disneyland, they can't go to dinners on Friday nights, they can't afford that. Having a Friday night service is like celebration. So we have a Friday night service and we just have music and preaching and then refreshments afterwards, and it becomes a family night where you come to church and it's something to do that doesn't cost anything. See, and so that they piggyback on that. So Friday night services in Hispanic churches really go because it's the way to do something without it costing you anything. Otherwise, you just stay home and what? The kids want to do something. The young people want to go someplace, so let's go to church. And they meet their friends there, and we have activities, etc. So I'm not sure does that help? Yeah.
How do you know, going to a church, how do you know that money are not being stolen in church? How do you know deacon is not pulling something in his pocket? You know what I mean? How would you go about?
Guarding the church's money? Yeah, that's a great question. You always need to be the usher. It begins with the ushers. You got to get ushers that are honest. Get honest ushers that are above reproach and always public. You collect the offerings in public. I'm for collecting offerings. I'm not for having a box, the Joash box, someplace in the parking lot. I think we need to have collect the offering, and then the money carried by always more than one person. Two is company, what? Three's a crowd. Two is company, three's a crowd. The rule of thumb is 3. With money, it's 3. Did you get that? In other words, if you got these two guys counting the money, it's easier for them to agree to embezzle and to steal than it is if you bring a third party in. With a third party in, they're done. And it's usually that's the case. So we always have 3 people handling money. So only 3 people count the money. At least 3 people count the money all the time. And that way they keep tabs of themselves. You trust nobody. Say it. That's it. That's it. You trust nobody. And if you adopt that principle, that'll guide you. You trust nobody. Well, Pastor, don't you trust us? No, I don't. We want to have 3 men always counting the money. And then you deposit it, and then it's and you're the person that does the recording, the accountant, is not the same person that signs checks. You got that? You as a pastor never sign checks. Never. That's something, because you never want to be able to be well, first of all, the temptation of it. Temptation for you to write checks to yourself or to your own stuff. You don't want to ever be tempted. And secondly, the appearance of evil. Well, so no, always somebody else is the one writing the checks. The accountant who keeps the books doesn't write the checks because, you see, he could manipulate the books. So he never. And then every check always has 2 signatures on it. There's always 2 people that are responsible for the writing of checks. And the check is only approved by the accountant approves for example, if you want to check Sunday, this next Sunday, you submit it this Sunday in a voucher form. Then the accountant takes it, looks at your account from where it's going, and the voucher is signed by you and then a deacon in charge of that account, goes to the accountant. He makes the check out because the money's already in the account. And then it goes to the deacons who signed the checks, then it can be cashed. So it'll take you a week to get a check, but it goes through this process so that there's very little chance of there being, some manipulation, some embezzlement of the stuff. And then we have a yearly, then we have a financial report every single month. He produces a financial statement where every penny is accounted for and every expenditure is accounted for. And it's every 3rd Saturday of the month we meet as a board to review the finances for the previous month. That is done religiously. That is done no matter what happens. The only time we don't do it is August, which is vacation month. Otherwise, it's done. We report every 3 months to the congregation a financial statement that includes every penny collected, every penny spent, and it's passed out to the congregation. And then every year, we're audited. An external audit comes in and audits the books to make sure that we are where we need to be. And so that way, we try to avoid any kind of embezzlement. Can it happen? You know, money can disappear. Some usher may take a bill of whatever, okay? Some in the deacon room, maybe some deacon may take $1 or some as they're counting it. It is possible, but for there to be big time stuff, it would be really rare. That would never happen. So the rule of thumb is trust nobody, okay? Trust nobody, and then we're all above that. That's biblical, by the way, because you find that it's 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul admonishes that. You can't even trust me. I'm the apostle. Don't even trust me. Send me some people to go with me. And then so your job is to guard that. I know some pastors end up writing checks and all that. I would be very careful. You don't want to give the appearance of evil. In a very small church, you can always find men that they don't have to be deacons. They can be assigned just to work and be a treasurer and be accountable and free you from that stigma or from that temptation to do that. Does that help you? Yeah. We have time for another couple of questions if you have one.
Are you a C3 501 nonprofit organization?
Oh yeah, absolutely. 503. Yeah, you want to be nonprofit.
And do you give exemptions of taxes as well?
Yes. 503. You want to be tax exempt organization because that gives you don't have to pay taxes on your income. All the money that you collected is tax exempt. The people that donate it also can take that and use it as an exemption for themselves. I mean, it's not as popular now with the new tax laws, but still can apply, and helps you as well as a minister. Fellows, and you asked the question, you will get a housing allowance in your salary. So when you get a salary from the church, part of that is housing allowance, which is tax-free money. It's exempt from income tax. Whatever you spend for housing, rent, utilities, furnishings, all that is exempt from taxes. And it's a great asset. Right now they're fighting to take it away. Some of the liberal atheists are trying to take it away, but right now it's still for you. And so, that's something that's going to be a benefit to you. You also can be involved in there's Social Security that you have to pay taxes into. It's worthwhile. Social Security is a great program. And also you can start your own retirement program through a 403B as a nonprofit organization. You can start that, and all of that money is tax-free, both Social Security and income tax free.
Until which position in the staff can you extend that benefit? Only for the pastor? Or?
Anybody who works for the church.
Okay.
Any staff person, whether they be ministers or secretaries, they can be part of that too.
Full-time, right?
Yeah, or even part-time. But if you have a salary, you can go to a 403B. And I would encourage that. Okay. So what you want to do is, this is just a freebie, what you want to do long-term is once you find you get your pastorate, buy a house. Okay, buy a house. It's one of your primary investments. No, don't buy the dream house, just buy a house. Start what they call the starter home. And so the money you spend on your home becomes tax exempt. That's why. That includes your payment, your furnishings, utilities, taken off. So it drops your tax rate by 10%. Okay, and so that's a great, and it's like that's your investment. If you bought a house here in California 25, 30 years ago, you paid $200,000 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home. It would be worth right now close to $700,000. So when you came to retire, you could retire, leave California, go to Texas, buy the same house for $200,000 and have $500,000 as your retirement account. See? So you plan long term. You plan long term. And so you don't have to buy your dream house. Just, buy a house that you can begin to sock away some money and then pay it off. And then put some money there for retirement. Remember the 10-10-80 plan? Remember that? That's a 10-10-80 plan. Put that into practice, and long haul, that will really, take care of you. Yeah.
Just curious, sir, do you think there's a call for the kind of evangelists that Whitfield and Billy Graham were in their day? Do you think that exists today, that an equivalent?
An equivalent, there is still a place for that. There's still a place for, the Billy Graham model. I think there's still a place for that type of evangelism, more sophisticated, done differently, but I think there's still a place for it because the secular model are the concerts, the rock concerts. The rock concerts, the stadiums, all these people fill these stadiums with music, so which means that there's a place also for, and most of these crusades or this George Whitfield, some of these were just God's people coming together anyway, and non-Christians came. Billy Graham has always been like 95% Christian, 5% non-Christian. So all the crusades are always like 90% believers, 10% non-believers. So it's always been like, no matter where he went, here around the world, it's always been like the bulk are believers, but they invite unbelievers to come and use it as a means to evangelize. I think there's still a place for that. It's modified, but still a place for that.
I ask in the context of our course, an evangelist, of course, is preaching, just like a pastor is preaching, but they're distinct roles. I just wonder.
Yeah. There's also smaller venues. We can utilize other different venues for us to preach the gospel, that we can, take that opportunity. It is interesting that one of the main means of winning people to Christ today is the internet. Campus Crusade has more decisions coming through the internet than any other way. Just people interacting through the internet, sharing Christ through the internet, because people are fishing. Unbelievers are fishing through the internet. And when I flew to Brazil this past summer, as I sat down, there was this couple here. We started talking, and the Brazilians. And so I said, "Oh, so what are you guys doing here in Brazil?" He says, "Oh, we came for a meeting." "Oh, wow. What was it about?" He says, "We are involved in technology. We have a ministry through technology where we preach the gospel through the internet." Wow. That's all they do. They put together sermons and messages and connect with the gospel. And that's all. He says, "We have I've been putting 10,000 people involved in this operation, putting sermons all over the internet and discipleship and Bible studies and lessons of just follow-up." So there's a sense where a lot of evangelism is being done through the internet. And so that's one way to take advantage of that. Some of you will be very gifted in being able to share the gospel and evangelism. You can have smaller venues. You can provide for, smaller ways to share Christ. Not maybe mega gym, stadiums, but smaller venues.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm picturing. If there's a call for that, there's a lot of us here who have done some street preaching, show up on a corner, read the Bible, and just start belting out the gospel. But is there right now, from your eyes, from your position, is there more than that in terms of what somebody could do like that full time?
Full time, probably not full time. I don't think there's that kind of unless you become a missionary through other churches supporting you to do that, then probably there's a place for that. That's more in the Orient or more out of America. Like we sent a missionary to India. Every January goes to India, and he has crusades. I mean, he packs these tents. 5,000-10,000 Indians show up. I mean, these are Sikhs and Indians that come, and they're typical Indian women on one side, men on the other side, and they come to hear him preach. They'll drive in and they'll have 3-4 hour meetings, and they'll just preach. And they're still open to crusades. So in other parts of the world, I mean, you could go, and you would have thousands of Indians listening to you at an open air meeting. Okay, because they're into that. They're coming to hear the message. Hard to do that in America, but there's ways to do it. You'd be interested in that. We did a crusade in East LA, and we tried two things. There's a real nice venue in East LA. There's a little park that has like a pond, and then inside of it there's a stage area. Then there's a hills around it, where the people could actually sit on the hill or sit toward the front, and then you're on stage, and there's a real nice pond in front of you, like a little lake. So we organized two musical groups. So we had this contemporary music guy come up, and so I sat in the hillside just to watch, and so we had this contemporary group begin to lead in song, because music draws. Music is a draw. And so they sang, they had guitars, they sang, and a few people came. They came and this is East LA now. This is a highly Hispanic community. And they came and they sat and they heard, and we had a guy preach the gospel, and he preached a great message, and some responses. And then they finished, and then they got off the stage. Then our second group came up, and they're like Christian mariachis. So they're like Christian, ethnic group, and they came with a big, what do you call them, bass drum and the guitars, and they were dressed in their and they had typical mariachi music, and they just began, but it was with Christian lyrics. And I sat there, and they began to play, and everybody got up. I mean, I was sitting there, they all got up and started walking towards the stage area. All these people, I said, look at this thing. When the other group sang, nobody moved. When these groups sang, they all moved, and they all went toward the front and heard this guy singing their songs, and then he preached. He was one of these evangelists. He preached the message, and so music is a great draw. You put together a great program, and it can even be spontaneous. Just if you have the freedom to preach in that, you can draw a crowd, and you can preach to hundreds and share a message, and just finding that getting them together. And so we were able to use that. I taught a class on open air preaching when I was at our church, and we take the guys open air preaching down to the market, down to the college. It's tough to do, tough to get a crowd. They just, people they just don't stop. And but there's ways, if you have entertainment of some type, go to places where they're relaxing, etc., and they'll respond to that. But I would say, if you can, take advantage of those opportunities. There's still, Greg Laurie still does it over in Orange County. They have the Harvest Crusades every year. He gets a great turnout. Obviously, it's Calvary Chapel, their theology, but it's doable. Yeah.
Actually, they got a sponsorship by the city. The stadium is for free.
The stadium is free?
Yeah.
That helps a lot. Helps a lot. Yeah. Okay. All right, gentlemen.